girls, and welcome to another episode of the Hey Girl podcast. I'm your host, Bethany, and in today's episode, I get to introduce you to my sister-in-law, Lisa Blevins. I hope a couple of weeks ago you had the opportunity to listen to my brother's interview and hear his story. And so many of you, after that episode went live, wrote us and left messages asking to hear from Lisa and just wanting to hear what it was like to walk alongside of him as his wife. And so Lisa was so gracious and so courageous to come on and share her story with us. I cannot wait for you to hear it. But really quickly, a reminder, there's a couple of things coming up I don't want you to miss. And so if you're in our area, or even if you're a little ways away, November 18th, we have our Simply Beautiful conference coming up, and we're so excited for this one-day teen girl conference. And check out our show notes. We will put the links for how you can register or find out more about this event. But I encourage you, if you are a mom, if you're a mentor of young women, if you are a teen girl who listens to this, definitely sign up. I can't wait to see you all there. It's coming up so quickly, and I'm pumped. So sign up. Can't wait to see you. And thank you again, just everyone for listening to this podcast, taking time out of your day. For those of you who have left reviews, at the end of this episode, I'm going to announce our winner of our review competition. And so many of you made it so hard because you left incredible reviews. And so we're so grateful to be a part of this with you. And I hope you enjoy this interview with my sister-in-law, Lisa Blevins. All right, girls, I am so excited because I have finally made this happen. I'm just kidding. I didn't make it happen. I almost ruined it completely. But my sister-in-law, Lisa, was incredibly gracious. And after we recorded this interview once already, and then the mics weren't working, it was a technical disaster. But let me just tell you, she did an amazing job, and she has agreed to come back and do it all over again so that you guys actually get to hear her story and just what she has to share. So, Lisa, welcome again to the Hey Girl podcast. Would you like to say hey to our listeners?
Hey, girls.
Doesn't it just feel really great just to say it? I don't know.
It does.
It's natural. I say it too much. It's starting probably to annoy people, but that's all right. So, Lisa, we released your husband's interview, and I had said you and I were together when we did that interview, and I mentioned to you, I have a feeling as soon as this goes out, we're going to get a lot of requests to hear your side of the story. And sure enough, within an hour of it going out, just started to receive messages and people requesting, okay, so now we want to hear from Lisa. And so thank you for being on today. Thank you for being willing to share. But for those listeners who know nothing about you, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about who you are and where you came from?
Yeah, all right. So I was born in Canada, raised in a Christian home in a very loving and stable environment. I was very privileged to grow up very deep in a church and a youth group environment where there was a lot of positive peer pressure, where it was really easy to be the good girl and do the right thing. I ended up going to Bible school, which is where I met my husband, Nathanael.
I actually didn't know this whole story before last week. So tell me a little bit, how did you guys end up meeting, dating, and obviously eventually getting married?
Freshman year, we all had to share our testimonies in front of the entire school. Was one of the things that they made us all do as freshmen, which you probably remember that. And I remember Nathaniel's testimony because, as everyone heard last week, he was fresh out of prison when he came to Bible school. And he was the only one there. It was a small school, and he was the only one there with that kind of story. So it kind of, stuck with me and made an impression.
He stood out a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I remember calling my mom and telling her, Mom, there's this kid here who just got out of prison for robbing a bank and all this stuff. And, about a year later when I was interested in him, I remember calling my mom and saying, "Hey, do you remember that guy I told you about a year ago? Well, I think I might be interested in him." And after we started dating, it was like a week later that my mom showed up as a surprise on campus
Yes,
to meet
she
him,
did.
which now as a mother, I'm like, of course she did.
With a shotgun and a shovel.
Well, she was very gracious and patient and all that. But now as a mother, I can't imagine the frantic panic that she was experiencing.
So Mercy's only 11. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to picture myself, Mercy, calling home. And first of all, when you first told her about him, you weren't interested at that point, right?
Right.
And so there was no filtering of his story. You're just telling this oh my word, you have to hear
this is crazy.
So you didn't even get the opportunity to cushion the blow. She now has the full story, and then afterwards oh, by the way, I kind of fell for him.
Right. Yeah, because there was a year in between when I first mentioned him and then when I was interested in him. Yeah. So what happened was he wrote a song about me, and that is how we got together.
The song Lisa, is that actually your name saying you the song?
No, my name was not. Well, it was called The Lease, but the way Lease, right?
Oh,
and yeah, but I knew it was about me because of the lyrics, not because of the name, So yeah, that's how we got together.
I'm putting all the pieces here. You're describing this really great church, really good youth group, a lot of good Christian friends, all of this. You go to Bible school. So you're continuing down this path. And then of all of the boys in Bible school, you're like, I'll take the guy straight out of prison.
Right.
So I have to ask, as you get married, what is that journey like? What are the things that come up in that, from coming from two very different backgrounds to being husband and wife?
Right. Well, because we were young when we were 21, we got engaged, 22 when we got married. And I think I was fairly naive about the baggage that was coming with him and the baggage that goes along with the things that he had experienced in his youth. And so I think I was kind of clueless as to what I was getting myself into. I mean, because I met him in Bible school and he was going to be a pastor, I thought that was that. And I don't know, I guess I just didn't really realize exactly what I was in for.
What you signed up for.
Exactly.
So he shared, obviously, in his story, some of the experiences with Bible school. We don't have to rehash all of that. But at any point along that journey, because he described a lot of internal wrestling, and was that something that you were really aware of at the time? Or was it really he was putting on a pretty good front while he was in a lot of turmoil in his own spirit?
I was aware of it, but I don't think I fully understood the depths of it. We're very different types of people. He is just more of an emotional person, and I'm just more of a matter of fact kind of person. And so when that whole thing went down with the school taking our ring away and all that, I was kind of like, well, we broke the rule, we kind of asked for it. I didn't think it was really fair, but I kind of understood where they were coming from. And so I was like, well, whatever. I was able to look at it kind of from an emotional way of well, A plus B equals C or whatever you want to say. Right. So it really didn't cut me that deep, or I didn't take it personally the same way that it really hurt him. And so I had a hard time even really understanding how hurt he was by it. And just because I had always been the good girl and I really always felt accepted by the church and by those kind of people. So I didn't feel slighted by it. Whereas because I think he had come from this background of never feeling like enough and never feeling accepted, always feeling like he was supposed to be someone different. it was very personal to him and very hurtful for him. And so I guess because my take on it was so different, I was not aware of how deeply he was hurt by it. Yeah. Because the hurt just wasn't that deep for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm not just from even him sharing, I'm not even sure in that moment that he was fully aware of how deeply he was hurting as well. But so fast forward, you obviously did your 4th year and then you're headed to the altar and you get married. And now, obviously, because Nathanael shared his story, we know that there's some pretty big changes that happen in his journey. Can you just, as much as you're comfortable, talk me through your journey in that as the wife walking through that? How did that unfold for you?
Right. Well, it was funny because listening to his interview from last week, that was honestly the first time that I've ever heard him say that it started his not going to church and his wrestling with God started even before we were married, because I was totally unaware of that at the time. And so I thought we were, he was upset with the school, fine, whatever. I knew that he was struggling with that hurt and that unforgiveness, but I didn't know that it went beyond that and that it, encompassed so much more than that. So when we got married, I didn't realize that was all still going on under the surface. And we got married, and because I was Canadian and moving to the US, I was not able to leave the country for an entire, I think it was a year, maybe it was 6 months, but I wasn't able to leave for a while, so I was stuck there. Yeah. I wasn't able to get a job for a year because of my visa, so I was stuck in an apartment. We had 2 cars for a little while, but when one broke down, we didn't have enough money to fix it, so we went down to 1 car. Oh my goodness. Here I was in this apartment, in this new town, in the new country, really, by myself in an apartment all day. And that was a very lonely season. Yeah. Without even knowing that all of this was still brewing under the surface for him.
So, yeah, newlyweds, you're in Connecticut at this point.
Right. So
where is he at in his journey at this point? You said you're unaware, so he hasn't said anything.
Not as far as, I knew that he was still hurt by what had happened with the school, but as far as his faith, I didn't realize that there was anything going on with that he was faltering in his faith. We got connected pretty quickly with a small group in Connecticut, which he talked a lot about, Bryn and Kirsten. They were our small group leaders. We just had a great community there with our small group. That just made all the difference as far as, getting connected with people. At some point in here, which I'm a little hazy on what point it was, well, I guess it would have been around 3.5 years of marriage, we got involved and we were asked to step up into leadership at that point in the church and do a discipleship program for the young adults. And it was around that time where he, as he said, got that family phone call that kind of altered everything for him. And he began to question the entire foundation of his faith. And at that point, it was very open. And he was fairly public about it too, if you remember. So we stepped down from that leadership position. He still kept going to small group for a while because that community was so loving and so open. They were willing to hear his doubts and hear his troubles and walk through that with him, which was awesome. I was pregnant with our first at the time too, so that was all mixed in, all the hormones and all the extra anxiety of we're going to have a baby and now you're changing everything on me. So that was a difficult season. And at some point during that pregnancy and after that 4-year mark, he stopped going to church too. That was when that changed.
And that's huge because you're talking about, again, coming from church, great youth group, go to Bible school, you think you married a pastor, right? And 3.5 years in, you're pregnant, your husband is now pretty much disowned his faith, stopped going to church. Pause in that moment for me. What is going on for you as a wife like, where are you at in your heart? I know you mentioned emotions. That's probably a little harder to gauge with hormones flying, but what did your community look like then? Because he talked a lot about Brandon Kirsten and obviously the support that he had, but what did that look like? What did that support system look like for you during that time?
Yeah, I had a couple really good girlfriends that were very supportive of me. And one that I remember specifically, Suzanne Allison, that we used to meet at Starbucks in the evenings and we would talk. And she was very intellectual, so she could relate to a lot of his intellectual hang-ups and stuff like that. But she loved Jesus and she loved us. And so she was a great support and very faithful in praying with me and praying for him and just listening and talking me through it. So there was that. And then, of course, our small group with Brandon Kirsten and had another couple friends too. But it was a very devastating season for me because I didn't see it coming. Even when he started asking the questions, I just assumed that he would work it out, and pretty quickly in my mind too. Like, I just was so confident in my faith that I really didn't believe that he would come to a point where he would fully walk away like he did.
So just not too long after that was when the job offer came. And so the community you just described was in Connecticut, but you ended up picking up and moving and heading to Florida.
Yeah.
What did that look like for you guys?
Well, we made the decision to move. Pretty much it was a financial decision because we had gone, when we had our son, down to one income. And in Connecticut, that was extremely difficult. So we took the transfer to Florida and we moved to Florida. And he had agreed that he would help me search for a church so that it would be a mutual decision, whatever church we landed on. And also because he was concerned about our son, who was one. He wanted to see what the childcare was like and what that environment was. So he wanted to be a part of the decision. So he agreed that he would come to church when we moved to Florida. So when we moved, we went to a couple different churches before we found Calvary Chapel in Melbourne, and that's where we landed for the next 5 years. Or where I landed, I should say, because he really, is maybe about a month of going before he was like, okay, well, this is going to be your church. So, I'm pretty much done here.
In his words, he was being a, quote, butthole, unquote. Those are his words.
That sounds
not
about
mine.
right. Yeah. He just wasn't, interested in going to church. And that was a very hard season because shortly after moving to Florida, we found out we were pregnant with our second. And so we had two very young kids. And it got to the point where me going to church on Sunday had become an issue, not because he didn't want me to go, but more because it was an issue of like, oh, suddenly I'm getting up early and babysitting two little kids so that you can go to church, you know? And so that often became a fighting point. And so there was a long season where I watched church online at home. And then during the week when he was at work, and he knew that I was doing this, so I don't want to make it sound like I was doing this behind his back, but he was okay with this. But during the week,
your own
I would
underground
go,
church going on.
Yeah, exactly. During the week, I would take part in, there was a women's Bible study, and then also there was a mom's group that was a similar to MOPS kind of thing. And so I was part of both of those. So I was still connected in the church and still meeting people and had that community there. But I did really miss being a part of, corporate worship for that season.
And the community that you are part of, how aware were they of just what was going on at home with Nathanael?
Well, so I think, this is so hazy because it's been so many years now that this has been 8 years, this journey. I can't remember exactly what the time was, but I think it was about a year of being part of that community before I told anyone there. And I remember sitting in a Bible study, my women's Bible study that I'd been a part of for a while. And during prayer requests, I just felt overwhelmed that I needed to share this burden that had been on me so long and that I hadn't felt like I could share before that. And I finally shared my story, and so many people were like, why didn't you say anything? But there were so many reasons that I didn't say anything. When we first moved to Florida, it was so new and it was so fresh that almost I was afraid to say it out loud because in some ways I hadn't had to actually tell anyone, because so many of the people had been a part of the journey, and I didn't actually have to say, my husband doesn't believe anymore. And I was afraid that, it sounds weird now, but it was almost like if I say it out loud, it's true and it's more permanent than I wanted to believe that it was. So I kept it to myself for such a long time. And then, in retrospect, I wish that I had have said something sooner. It would have been so much easier to share it sooner. But for some reason, I didn't want it to change the way that people thought of me, and for that to be the thing that I was known for.
I think that's a really insightful, what you just said there, like a concern that people would look at you differently. What was the fear for you? Like you say, differently how?
Well, I think for myself, I am a fairly judgmental person. And so I can very easily envision what people might think of me because I've maybe thought those things of other people and make the assumption that I was less spiritual than someone else because my husband wasn't a believer, or I was less than as a believer because of our home situation being different than what theirs might be. And that my walk with God obviously looks different because of this burden that I had. So I guess I just in some ways assumed the worst of people, that they would assume the worst of me, or they would think less of me because of it, which isn't fair to put that on other people. But really it was coming from this part in my heart of fear of not being accepted and just being thought of differently than I wanted to be, or differently than most of the other people. Because, at that point I didn't know anyone else who was walking through this same thing that I was walking through.
I think that's such a good thing for us to remember, though, because I know you say, like, it sounds weird to say, but it doesn't sound weird. Like, I've not walked in those shoes, but even just hearing you share that and trying to put myself in the shoes of walking into a church community, and most people, like, when they find out you're married, immediately, like, the questions start coming, oh, what does your spouse do? Or the number one question, where is he?
Right.
And man, it makes me check myself as far as how have I had those conversations with people and being sensitive to that too. It's an honest response for you to say, I was afraid people would judge me the same way I've judged people. And I think every single one of us, if we're being really honest with ourselves, fear that. Like, really, we fear that they are going to make the same judgments that I would make. But you shared it with the community. How was the response? It's been a year and you kind of say it out loud. How do you feel like it was received in the church?
Oh, people were very gracious. And, the number one thing was, why did you wait so long to say something? We could have been praying for you or, walking through this with you. So I wished I had have said something sooner. I wish that I had have had that support, and I wish that I hadn't let fear hold me back.
And once you said something, what was the change? So now everybody knows. So what did it look like from that point on, being a part of that community? How did people, like you said, they're like, we could have been praying. How did they come alongside of you? What was some of the positive experience of kind of having that out there?
Well, I would say, first of all, a lot of my relationships went deeper because of it. When you have something like that you're holding on to and you're not sharing out of fear, your relationships and your friendships are only going to be surface, because you can only go a certain depth if you're not willing to go beyond that point with people. And once you're willing to share those kind of things with people, people are willing to share with you. And so a lot of my friendships got a lot deeper at that point. And the people that I've stayed in touch with still are those people that I went deeper with, that were willing to walk through that with me and didn't think of me differently,
That's a good word. Was anything harder once people knew?
Again, just in my own mind, like that fear of people are thinking differently of me, or, that paranoia, oh, they're treating me differently, or, when Nathanael would be around, which wasn't often, but I would know that in their minds, they were seeing him as an unbeliever now instead of just my husband, So I'd say that was the only thing. But again, that was all in my mind. So I'm not sure that it was actually legitimate.
So you're in Florida for a number of years. It sounds like you have a really wonderful support system, people surrounding you. Talk me through a little bit this next transition that you come up on, because it's Florida, and then again another job offer enters the scene, and now we're talking about a big move.
Right. My husband had gotten a phone call from a friend that had been one of our neighbors in Florida about this job. That had happened, I guess it was the November previous to that. And he had said, no, this isn't really something, that's not really what I do. So then come around 5 months later to March, he got another phone call, and they were like, hey, we've actually changed the job description because we haven't been able to fill this spot. And when he told him about it, he was like, yeah, actually, I'm totally interested in that. And so I was sitting in one of those Thursday morning Bible studies when he texted me and said, hey, I got this phone call, and I think I actually am interested in this job. And I was like, no. And, it was prayer request time. So my hand went right up, and I was like, I need some prayer because my husband is talking about a job in Texas out of nowhere. So they were, very encouraging. And my mentor was teaching the Bible study, and she was very encouraging to me. And, she was like, some people think that Texas is the land of God. So, and I'm like, not what I wanted to hear at that point, but
the Texans tell us all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So, and my best friend was sitting next to me in that Bible study, and she likes to remind me that I turned to her and I said, this is not happening. We are not moving to Texas. No. And she says, and I believed you.
Now I have trust issues. So yeah. One friendship down.
Yeah. So I went home and we discussed this job, me with tears. I had felt no draw to Texas. I didn't even want to visit Texas. I'd never been. And it seemed totally out of the blue for me. And when we talked about it, I really felt like God was saying that we were supposed to do it. Nathanael had been unhappy at his job for a couple years at that point. And this was something he was excited about career-wise, and that hadn't, and it came to us. That was the other thing. He didn't apply for all these jobs or whatever. This was like literally a job offer, just like placed in his lap. And I really felt like God was saying, you're supposed to do this. And so I told Nathanael, I said, crying, I don't want to move to Texas, but I think that God wants us to. I think that God has opened this door. And I remember saying to him, I think that this job offer is God showing you his loving kindness. Because it was such a great job offer, as far as it was a big step up for him, and he was excited about it, and it was, more money and a better title and everything. And just for him being unhappy at work for so long, for this just to come out of nowhere, I was like, this is God saying, like, this is a gift I have for you. We took the job, and it was about a month, maybe even less. I think it might have been 3 weeks that we had. Maybe it was a month, but around there. And we were in Texas. We totally moved here blind without even coming to look for a place. We had, our friends that were already here helped us find a place. And we drove here, and the job has worked out great for him. And a couple weeks into being here, we were doing the church shopping thing, and it was the third church that we went to when we found Milestone Church. And I feel like in retrospect, I can see that God brought us here just for Milestone Church, for the experiences that we would have there. At first, Nathanael was like, "Really? Why did you pick this church? It seems kind of small," because his preference was the bigger churches because they had better security and childcare and programs and stuff like that, which was all that he was, looking for, really, was for the kids and stuff like that. So we tried it out, and we were sitting there, and honestly, at first, we weren't super impressed. It was, as far as the building goes, it was in an old grocery store, and the kids' classes weren't all that great because of their lack of space. Our youngest was in with like 4 grades older than him, and there were like 100 kids in his class.
He was in the produce section.
So we weren't, super impressed about the building or anything like that. But I still remember the man that gave us the tour of the church, and he left an impression on Nathanael, especially too. He's just a really nice guy and just very, very genuine. And then we went in and we, took part in worship, and I just remember my husband turning to me, even this is before the sermon, and saying to me, "I can already tell that this is the church for us." Which I was kind of like, "Really? Well, I love this church. This is like great, but why do you love this church?" So we, went back the next week and the next week and the next week. And I kind of was waiting for that point where he was going to say, "Yeah, we're not going this weekend," or "I'm not going this weekend."
Right. And he'd only agreed to look for churches. That was kind of your... Right.
Gotcha. And so every Saturday night I would say, "So are we going to church tomorrow?" And he was like, "I guess." And that just went on for months and months. And I was, and he had made some comments about the church and, certain speakers pastors he liked to hear speak, and how impressed he was with the worship and the environment at the church. It's just such a unique place that, they just have this great environment of welcoming people and being very genuine.
Yeah.
And they just constantly are saying the words like, "We want you here. You're welcome here. It doesn't matter who you are, what you believe. If you agree with what we're saying or not, you're welcome here, and we want you here." And so I think that for him, coming from a place of, "Well, yeah, I don't agree with most of what you're saying," to be welcomed that way and to be told, like, "We want you here. It doesn't matter what you believe," was just great. And it was, at the same time, it was the kind of church where the gospel was being spoken. There, it was just the gospel was being shared, but in such a loving way. And, "We want you here no matter who you are." And so that was really, from the way I remember it, something that really impressed on me. Months went by and months went by, and we just kept going and we kept going. And it was around March, which had almost been a year. So that was about 10 months of being in Texas, when we were at a service, and the pastor was speaking on a restart after failures, and just preaching the message of, it doesn't matter what's in your past, where you've been, what you've said, what you've done, you can always come back. I remember how I felt during it, but as a woman that's a believer that always sits next to her unbelieving husband, I always hear the message 2 ways. I hear it for me, and then I wonder what he's hearing. Yeah. And so I remember wondering how he was hearing that. one of the guys on the worship team got up and sang the Zach Williams song Chainbreaker, which if you've never heard that song, you need to get off and listen to it because it is incredibly powerful.
We'll have to put it in the show notes so people can link and listen.
There you go. But it's a very powerful song about how God can overcome whatever it is that stands in the way. And it was for me, a very emotional, moving moment. But it wasn't until later when we were driving home and I was asking Nathanael, which I always did. I always asked him on the way home, oh, what did you think of the sermon or the service or whatever? Just, small talk, curious what his thoughts were. And he started to cry out of nowhere, what seemed like nowhere to me. And then later when we got home, we talked about it. And, he at that point was like, I found out for the first time that how much Milestone had been impacting him and how he was reevaluating some of these, really hard statements that he had made about the faith. And, and at that point he was like, all I know is that there's something happening in this church and it's real. And so that was a few months ago, and we've, continued to go to church, and he's still trying to figure out his way, working through a lot of this stuff and a lot of this church hurt and baggage and stuff like that. But he, is open to what God has for him and where God's taking him, and open to really hear God speak and be a part of corporate worship and a church community, which is amazing. And it's been a huge change for us.
I'm still in this moment of you're driving home, like you said, he starts crying, what feels like to you out of nowhere. Because as you mentioned, it's not like he's been letting you into a lot of these internal wrestlings and conversations. And he even mentioned in his interview a fear of talking to people about it because he wasn't ready to go into any kind of debates. And man, the wife, it's been 8 years and you just get hit with I'm just it's like when your kid comes to you and they just drop this bomb on you. And at least for me, I always have that internal conversation of calm on the outside, freak out on the inside, calm on the outside, freak out on the inside. And just what is happening inside? Because I assume there's a part, because I know my brother's personality. There's a part that's okay, I don't want to overreact and freak him out right now. What is happening inside of you in that moment?
Well, I guess I was kind of wondering what is happening right now here. Is this what I think it is happening, where he's, recanting on some of these things that he said, and he's suddenly open to what God might be saying to him. And obviously I had sat in that service too, and I had felt, the Holy Spirit was there and that it was a very powerful service. Yeah. But again, there had been a lot of those, and I wasn't sure what the impact level for him had been. So I was totally thinking, okay, I wanted to not overreact, jump up and scream, yes, because I didn't want to scare him, and I didn't know exactly what it meant at that point and where he was at, really. And so I just wanted to be open to whatever he was going to say to me, because we were young when this whole journey started, and I was hard on him, and I was really hurt and angry during the beginning season of this. And I didn't listen to what he had to say a lot. And I took it personally so much. Anything that he would say against the faith or against God, to me, was just a personal knife in the heart. I took it so personally, and I wasn't able to hear what he was really saying as far as what he was feeling as a person and what he was experiencing as far as the hurt. And so I wanted to be careful to listen to actually what he was saying and what he was feeling at that point, just to try and to not try and fix him, and tell him what to do or whatever, to just listen so I could leave the door open, that he knew he could talk to me about it. That was really in that moment. That was what I wanted to do, was I wanted to make sure that I left it open so that he knew he could talk to me about this, because it had been such a strained topic for so long. And I wanted him to feel like he could share with me, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. Because, it's been 8 years of me not wanting to hear it, or it being not what I wanted to hear. So I wanted to be careful with that.
So this has been a journey for you, and it's not, as you mentioned, this is not like you've reached the end of the journey. You're like, okay, I'm done. Like this, it's a different stage, and there's obviously there's a lot of hopeful things and exciting things. And like you said, kind of those Holy Spirit, God is moving, which is incredible. But for you right now, you have this opportunity to speak into another young woman or older woman or whatever age woman that's in those shoes of, my husband is not a believer, and this is the season, this is where I'm at right now. Is there anything that you would want to say to that woman, because you mentioned, like, early on for you, you didn't know anyone, like nobody that was walking through that. What would be your words to that woman? Just words of encouragement, or maybe even words of caution, like you just mentioned earlier, some of making mistakes in the beginning of, wrestling with how to handle it well, or how to listen instead of trying to fix him.
Right. Well, there are a few verses that have really helped me. And of course, one of them is in 1 Peter 3, where it talks, to my knowledge, that's the only Bible verse that is directly written to the woman that's married to an unbeliever, where it talks about using our attitude and our actions rather than our words to win over husbands. Because I can tell you, after 8 years of trying, it is not my words that have had any impact. And, if anything, they had a negative impact, So I would say to walk your walk the best that you can in front of them, and be faithful in the way that you can be. The other verse that really helped me was, there's a verse that talks about having mercy on those who doubt. And I did not have much grace for him during the beginning of this season and the first several years that I walked through this. It really probably wasn't until I was in Florida and I had that mentor that really helped me to learn how to be more gracious with him, and to be more understanding of where he was at, and just of him as a person. And, I struggled for a long time with respecting him, because suddenly we found ourselves in this place where we didn't have much in common anymore. And he didn't subscribe to any of these things were the foundation of my life and my faith. And so I suddenly felt like I can't trust him to make decisions because he's not seeking the Lord. How can he know the right thing to do? I'm going to have to, trust my own gut or my own, conscience or Holy Spirit leading, whatever you want to say. And it really was through the time that I spent with my mentor and her Bible studies and stuff like that I learned that's just really not true. That, if God can turn the hearts of kings in the Old Testament, he can turn the heart of my husband and he can guide him. And And even if he makes bad decisions, it's still my job to respect him as a husband and spiritual leader. Because even if he's not a believer, he is still the spiritual leader in our household. So those were things that were really hard, that were learning for me. And I don't know if that's specific to everyone that goes through this, but those were the things for me that were really hard that I had to learn and overcome and still battle with. You know, if I'm being honest, those are still things that I battle with, being gracious and being respectful. And
so then for all of us, I say us because this would be my camp of women who we're not the, our husbands are not the unbelievers, but we have friends, sisters, relatives, whatever, that are walking through this journey. Are there any words that you have for them, just of encouragement of how to love and support our sisters in that journey? Because you mentioned times of loneliness. I know the last time we talked, you used the term spiritual widow. I'd never heard that term before, but I know there's unique challenges to that journey. But how can we love our sisters best as they walk that journey and support them?
I think just being aware that it can be a very lonely season, because for someone who's married to a believer, there's a lot of things that you don't think about because your spouse is a believer and your whole family and home dynamic is based on that. But when you're married to an unbeliever, it's not that way. And so it can be a very lonely season where there are certain things that you can't talk to them about and you can't share with them. Or maybe you do, and they're not very receptive or understanding, or they don't want to talk about spiritual things, or whatever the case may be for different individuals. But I think just understanding that that can be a very lonely season, and that just opening up that conversation with those people of how are you doing? What do you need? Is there anything that I can do for you? Or, usually it's just, you need people. Those people, the people that are walking through that lonely season, they just want somebody, and usually it's just all you need is one person that is going to understand and not trying to fix it. Someone who is just going to listen, and someone who is going to tell you the truth, lovingly, but tell you the truth. You want that person to be someone who knows their Bible and walks with the Lord and can tell you the truth and say, I'm so sorry you're going through this hard time, but you're doing what God's called you to do. You're loving your husband. You're living for the Lord. Just keep doing it. You've got this.
Awesome. Lisa, I'm just so grateful your willingness to come on, to share your story. Just really kind of thinking back on these things, I'm sure there's both the hopeful and grateful side, but then it's hard sometimes to walk back through that stuff. So thank you just for your courage and your vulnerability today and opening up. But before I totally let you off the hook and close out our conversation, I think I really have to pause and ask you the question that is really on everybody's mind at this point. And you know what's coming. But Lisa, what in all of this, in your life and who you are, what is the most superficial thing about you?
So I'm a faithful listener, so I knew that question was coming as soon as you asked me to be on the podcast. So I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I even bounced some stuff off Nathanael and said, is this the most superficial thing about me?
That's a really dangerous question for him to answer.
Well, that's what he said. Do I look stupid? I'm not answering that question. So I think probably, okay, here are my top couple. I am a little bit superficial about my hair, and I have to style it every day. So any day that I wash it, which is every other day, I have to blow dry it and then straighten it. And if I don't wash it, I have to straighten it and at least style it. So I just really don't wear my hair up unless it's caught in the rain kind of situation where you have to. It's a last resort. Yes.
All right. And I'm so tempted to like lay out scenarios like, what about this scenario? Would you still straighten your hair? But I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I honestly didn't know I had no idea. I mean, now that you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, you do straighten your hair.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I have naturally kind of a frizzy hair. So if you didn't know that, you might think that I naturally just wake up and it looks like this, but I do not.
Oh, now nobody thinks that because you just admitted it.
I know. You forced it out of me.
Too, though, so.
Okay, well, yeah. So I really like to shop for clothes too, but I like to get like a good deal. So I like to feel like I just got like a name brand item for like 25% of what store prices were, or whatever.
Do you have a favorite place you like to shop?
Well, around here, there's a lot of good secondhand. Like they have a Clothes Mentor, which is a secondhand name brand. And then we also have a Goodwill Boutique, which is name brand women's clothing, like higher end stuff. It's kind of expensive for what it is. But yeah.
Very nice.
And then I have one more superficial thing, which I don't know if this counts as superficial or OCD, but I shave my legs every day. Every day.
Shauna.
You know what? She was my roommate at one point at school, and I thought she was weird when she did that. But as soon as I got married, I started to shave my legs every day.
I was just going to ask, did one of you influence the other?
She did. So, Shauna, look what you've done to me. If you're listening, this is your fault.
I like to know that our guests are influencing one another in powerful and deep ways, and also superficial ways. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's honestly been such a gift to hear your story. I am excited for these women to hear it, and I know that it's going to mean a lot to women out there, especially women who are either on that journey with you or like you, they've been there and maybe they're further down the line, but excited to get it out there. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, girls, that was my sister-in-law, Lisa. Don't you just love her? Seriously, I am so inspired by her story and all that she shared. And I'm just praying that there are women out there that this is exactly what you needed to hear, to be reminded that you're not alone. And there were things that stood out to me that are just still kind of resonating with me. One is someone that works at a church, and her description of, starting new churches and the importance of the community around her, but even being comfortable sharing this with the people around her. I think when she went to Florida, and she talked about it was almost a year that she kept this journey to herself. And I needed that reminder. Am I a person, like a safe person for people when they meet, that they feel like they can be totally vulnerable and real without that fear of judgment? And I'm just so proud of how courageous she's been in this journey, how honest, and just sharing her story and the good parts, but also the really challenging parts. I have not had to walk this road of having to wake up and get kids to church on my own because my husband is not going to church anymore, or to try and walk that fine line when your spouse and you are on totally different pages in regards to faith. And how do you honor your spouse and still remain faithful to God? And her stories about choosing to stay home and watch sermons from home and find her community within, the weekday, and all of those, just the little things along the way that, watching from the outside, I just was so blessed by how she loved my brother so well. And I feel like she did that journey so well, of being honoring to him and respectful to him, and still continuing to choose Jesus in her own journey. And so I pray, sisters, wherever you're at out there, and maybe it's not a difference of faith, maybe it's something else in you, that you're in a new community, or maybe you've been there a while and you're you're scared about something in your life, something that you feel like if you shared it with someone would make you feel less than. Just like Lisa talked about, the fear of people looking at her and a husband that was not a believer, that she would somehow be less than. And girls, I just encourage you to find your people and to let them in, because her testimony of she wished she had said something sooner, and the incredible relationships and mentors that she built after she really opened up and allowed people to get to know that side of things, and how that really helped them open up to her. I hope that's an encouragement to you, and that it instills courage in you, that whatever it is for you, that you'll find those people and begin building relationships that really have that kind of depth and openness. Because honestly, in all of my friendships, and Lisa got me thinking about this, my greatest friendships in my life, so many of them really started going to that depth when it was me that broke the ice and was just like, okay, I have to be honest, I'm a hot mess. And I don't have very many stories. I'm trying to think if I have any of rejection in that. I'm sure there's some, but it's so outweighed by the women who not only received me in that and continued to welcome me into their lives, but that I feel like they even loved me more because it was that much more real. So Lisa, so grateful for her, and so grateful you got to hear her story. But before I let you all go, it's time to announce our winner, and I'm so excited. But I have to say, this was a very, very hard decision. Okay, so everybody just needs to know that. But I did pick a winner, and I've enjoyed reading all of them. But here's who I'm going with. And all I know is your screen name or whatever on iTunes. So hopefully you're listening to this and you can reach out, leave me a message, let me know who you are. This one is from, it's ATMC 464. And she said this podcast has become a Monday staple, and if not a necessity to take on the week ahead. 2 months ago, I moved to Germany from Mississippi with my 2-month-old and 2-year-old as my husband's Air Force service relocated us. This podcast has given me friends during a time of loneliness, encouragement when the day seems so long, truth in God's providence, and I have simultaneously laughed and cried in the best possible way. Oh my goodness. When I read this one, I cried. I just found it was so beautiful, and so much of what our heart is for this podcast. And girlfriend, whoever you are in Germany, we love you. Thank you for leaving this review. Please, please, please reach out. Let us know your name, how we can send you a mug, and just know that you are not alone. And honestly, we'll be praying for you as you transition there, and that God will bring around some awesome group of girlfriends for you to continue to encourage you on your journey. So for all of you out there, thank you again for being a part of this week, for giving us your time and listening to this story. I pray that you are blessed, and I pray especially that this will be something that encourages you as you run your race in your place and keep being awesome. Love you, girls.